Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Don Hicks. The focus of this podcast is to provide coaching, equipping, and strengthening of church leaders who will lead and equip the believers for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. This will enable healthy leaders and healthy churches to flourish and thrive as they carry out the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, in the power of the Holy Spirit. Welcome to Church Leadership in Focus. I'm your host, Don Hicks. Our guest today is Jason Porter. And you ask yourself the question, who is Jason Porter? You're going to find out today. Also, I want to just say a word about how God crossed our paths together. But first, I just want to welcome you, Jason, to the podcast today.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate the invitation.
You know, I could tell your story, but I think you could tell it better. Now, just so people understand, I'm in the Chick-fil-A leadership building. Lee Hall owns 3 franchises, and he rented me a space here to have my ministry, Church Health Solutions. And actually, this is where we do our podcast for church leadership in focus as well. And I have a sign out front, and it has Church Health Solutions with a cool little logo. And then I think it's our email, our website. So how did you find out about us?
I literally was driving down the street here, Don, and I happened to notice your logo. But to your point about Lee Hall and Chick-fil-A, I'm on the FCA Board of Directors here in Lynchburg, and we've had some meetings here with their conference training center. And I was checking on a listing. I'm in real estate and was checking on a listing and drove by, saw your sign and thought, I need to find out who these guys are. Because I do a lot of work with churches with real estate, and looked you up on the website and did a little bit more background, found your phone number, which you posted online. So you never know who's going to call you, so be careful about that. But
That's right.
Lo and behold, that's how we connected, and man, the Lord's turned it into something really cool.
Now, how many days did you have to go by there, or months or years before you called?
Honestly, your sign and seeing just church sort of registered with me, obviously, as I drive around looking for business and thinking about business opportunities and things like that. I knew I wanted to network with you, or at least find out more about who you were. And then I've got a medical background, so ironically enough, seeing even your logo with kind of that EKG rhythm thing going really intrigued me. So I just wanted to do a deep dive, find out more about your ministry and what you guys were involved in, and here we sit.
Well, what's neat is that, and I just kind of brought this up to Jason today. He said, "Are you kidding?" I said, "No." We all get to points of being discouraged about ministry, being discouraged about business. And so when I received a phone call from you, actually, Rob and I were sitting here at this table, and we had just finished praying that God would bring people into the ministry where we could share what we do and how we could help them and things. And your call literally came less than an hour after that. That's probably why I was so shocked when you called, and you made a comment, say, well, there's some property that I've been working on down the road, and I've passed you by for a month or so. I just decided today's going to be the day that I'm going to call. And then we got together, and it's really amazing what God has even done there. So here we sit, and we're going to do 2 podcasts. This will be a 2-parter. The first one's going to be about your professional life and things, and then the second one's going to be about your ministry life. And I want to just give a quick little bio on Jason. And it says this: as a military kid, Jason grew up moving frequently, but now proudly calls Lynchburg home. He and his wife, Rachael, a successful designer, a decorator, and home stager, enjoy raising their 2 children in Central Virginia. Before becoming a full-time realtor with Legacy, Jason was an associate athletics director at Liberty, as well as a faculty member. when they weren't attending a game, Jason and Rachel were putting their real estate experience to work buying, restoring, and selling or renting their properties. Together, they worked on nearly 15 homes personally and consulted with clients on countless others. They enjoy offering their years of experience and expertise to their clients in many facets of real estate. So that's just a small bio, but it's exciting to see your journey. You mentioned that, and I'm going to let you kind of talk little bit about that. What got you into real estate? This is kind of a small way of saying it, but I noticed here. So you worked with you were the associate athletics director at Liberty. How'd that come into play?
Yeah, that was actually the first job, the first career, the first calling, if you will. And my background is actually in sports medicine and athletic training. So I think most people know what that is, but we're the guys that are on the sideline and girls that are on the sideline at athletic events. And when the athlete gets hurt, the medical staff that runs on the field and scoops up the bodies is what I like to say. That's what I did for almost 20 years. And in the process of doing that, Rachael, my wife, had also had some background in real estate, or had more background in real estate. And we just kind of started, as the bio said, working on some properties and doing some flips and some renos and things like that. And she's just got an incredible eye for design. And so it was sort of a little bit of a side hustle for us. And as the Lord would have it, it just kind of continued to evolve and turn into something that was a little bit bigger. And after right out, I guess, about 20 years in sports medicine, while the job was great, the best seats in the house on game day, the hours are tough. A lot of people just see game days and think, man, it must be great to be under the lights and with the action of athletics, and it is. But the hours are really, really difficult. So we wanted to do something that was going to be a little bit of a change. And so we took that side hustle of real estate and turned it into something full time. And it's been about 7 years now, which is crazy. But I still like to be involved in athletics over at Liberty University and do some different things with the radio and some other things along those lines. But it's just cool to see how God intertwines everything and brings the journey in full circle.
Well, you're actually the voice of Liberty, right?
I do color. So I'm the color guy with Alan York, who's play-by-play. And we broadcast the Liberty football games and then Liberty men's basketball.
Wow, that's exciting. Before we did the podcast today, one of our LU basketball players, why don't you say what happened in the draft with him last night?
Yeah, hot off the presses here, right? This is Talon Peter was a young man who came in last year and played just 1 year at Liberty, but immediate impact, 6'4", swing guard, and just a phenomenal athlete. Actually got picked up in the second round of the NBA draft last night. I believe he was the 54th pick by the Indiana Pacers, who just lost in the NBA Finals.
Oh, wow, that's exciting. Well, you've explained what part of the medical field you were in, and all this stuff actually goes together, especially when you get into real estate. What my dad taught me at a young age, he said, well, idle hands are the devil's tools. And so he made sure I was busy. Had a paper route. I did cut grass. I had friends in construction, so I was out there digging holes, sounded like they were foxholes, and doing all kinds of things. And so I have a background in construction management. I actually owned a company in construction management. We built custom homes, and then we got into building motels, and that's another story for later. But I learned so much things there that helped me when I was a pastor. I was a pastor for 23 years, senior pastor, and then working in the area of church health and church conflict. Maybe you don't know much about that. Call me. I'll explain it to you. Put you in a seminar on that. But all the background goes in to how we can, if you would, leverage that for the future. Just like when you're doing athletic training. Well, that led to what you're doing today. One thing kind of leads to another. When you talked about, in your real estate, and that realtors today are kind of entrepreneurs in a way, and they can find other ways to make income and to leverage different things as well. So what was your first sale in real estate like?
Well, it was probably a little atypical because, like I said, coming out of athletics, I think one of the greatest things that people don't often prepare themselves for is a realization of, as you said, Don, how relationships play into life. I think we minimize some of that, and we don't see people as connectors and the community piece that the Lord has intended for the community of God. And one of the things that I was always trying to focus on, obviously, is the client or the person in particular. And one of my biggest sales, to be honest with you, right out of the gate, was former Liberty head football coach Turner Gill. I left athletics and was out on my own for about a year and a half doing real estate. And Coach Gill got called somewhere else and decided to leave and asked me to sell his house, which is not a house that you would normally get right out of the gate as a first time realtor, but it's a relationship issue, and it's a trust issue. And I've always put in a lot of emphasis on the relationship side of things, and I think there was a trust there for sure for Coach and his wife to allow me to do that. But the people part of that, I think, is really, really critical. And I don't know if a lot of time as believers we spend enough time remembering the community that God has surrounded us with. And sometimes we know what it's going to pan out to. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes you wind up at a podcast with a guy that was a total stranger a month and a half ago. So it's cool to see how God brings that back around. But I think there's a part to it as well where Rachael and I do a lot of work with college students still. That's kind of our passion and our group that we're called to work with. And I remind them all the time as they're picking majors and choosing majors that it may or may not be the lifetime calling, the lifetime job. You've got to be flexible and asking the Lord daily what he's got for you. And if it's a change of career, it's a change of pace. Sometimes it's a big change like it was for us. I think to hold those things loosely and just realize the way God has gifted you with passions and abilities and talents, as scripture talks so evidently about, you've got to follow through on that. And you've got to do what the Lord is asking you to do next.
Well, in essence, what you're talking about is that Jesus is our commander in chief. If he says to go here and do this, we don't say, well, how long until I'm ready to move you to another place? And I think you've hit on something very, very vital here, relationships. If you don't take time to build a relationship before you try to even do business sometimes, it can be detrimental. I teach emotional intelligence, and when the students come into the class, I teach online. Then I used to do 8 years residentially, and I do 1 week intensive still there. I always say, "Hey, raise your hand if you went to kindergarten." And the ones that raised their hand, I said, "You can leave." And then I pull out a picture that I got about everything I learned in kindergarten. Be respectful, raise your hand for a question, don't pull the ponytail of the little girl next to you. Keep your hands to yourself. I mean, all those, wash your hands before you eat. I mean, all kinds of just common sense things. But it seems that we live in a world that people don't seem to have much common sense, much less emotional intelligence, and if you would, relational intelligence, how to build relations, and how to check their ego and their pride, and work with a person. And you do that by listening. So often we don't listen in a conversation. I told my daughter the other day, I said, we can't have a conversation if you're going to be the only one talking or I'm the only one talking. And she started laughing. She said, yeah, Dad, you've been telling me that a long time. And I leverage that in a good way in the profession that I'm in. That there's some people that are hard to like when you're in customer service. And I don't want to just bite my lip. I want to understand that person and find out what's going to be the key to open them up and to do that. So when you started your own company, how did that take place?
Yeah, it was a really good opportunity to join a brokerage here locally in Lynchburg, and again, a God ordained moment that maybe we can jump into at some point. But it was actually from, ironically enough, a deal that went sideways, and I was working with June Smith, who's my current broker now, and she was the listing broker on the other end of a commercial transaction, and the deal just didn't pan out, and she's got a great reputation around town, and so I was a little nervous. It was one of my first commercial jobs or transactions, or at least it should have been. And I was a little anxious to even go tell her that my client had a change of heart and we were going to go a different direction. And she couldn't have been more gracious about it. And it really caught me off guard, to be honest with you, Don, because I thought it was going to be a little bit of a cantankerous situation, and it was anything but. And that conversation, then just a few days later, she followed up with me and she said, Jason, I enjoyed working with you right up until we had to pull the plug on the deal. But she said, I'm actually starting a new brokerage here in town. Is it something that you would be? And I don't even think she finished the sentence before I jumped at the chance to join her. And so Rachel and I sat down with her over coffee and just kind of heard her vision for Legacy Realty and Development is the name of our brokerage, or her brokerage. And we were on board almost immediately. But again, a relational transaction, and having made that transaction or that transition from sports medicine, where I was in emergency situations, taking care of an injured athlete on the field, and then dealing with
everybody watching you while you're doing it.
Yes, sir, 100%. Feeling that, and then also the pressure of trying to communicate that with coaches, and then the parent piece too. Trying to talk mom and dad off of a plane from California that don't need to come all the way to Virginia. We've got this. It's okay. You can come if you want. But a little bit of customer service on steroids, probably not a good example for athletics, but nonetheless, the point is, that relationship and that assurance of a critical situation. And then I've transitioned that, of course, into the real estate piece with people's most valuable possession. And it's high anxiety sometimes. It's a major life change a lot of times if folks are downsizing or upsizing because there's new additions to life, which is fun. But sometimes the transition and the reason to sell or to do something different or move away is not always a good thing. And so there's a counseling piece to that. But it definitely comes back to that common thread of relationship.
Well, when that was going on, did you ever question yourself like, God, you brought me to do this, and now it's gone sideways? Did I really hear your voice on this?
Yeah, I think so. I think anyone who makes a transition like that does something, especially when it's a major career transition. And timing wise, I don't know how much this will preach to everybody across the board here, but for those folks who've been on campus and know something about Liberty, I was involved in athletics during the heyday of the athletic complexes that were being built. So the new football stadium, the new track and field and aquatics area. I mean, we just go on and on. The new athletics arena where Liberty basketball plays. So all these things were part of my job description almost by default. But interestingly enough, looking back, I tell people sort of tongue in cheek that I spent more time in planning and construction than I did taping ankles. And I thought, all right, Lord, what are we doing here? Something's changing. So, you feel that. But then when I stepped away, I had texts and emails from buddies that were saying, Jason, what are you doing? You guys just built these unbelievable facilities and you're walking away. And I come back to what the Apostle Paul says in Philippians, where, I just told them if they were believers or not, I said, Paul talks about having a peace that passes all understanding. And I said, to you on the outside, you probably don't understand this. But I said, Rachel and I understand this. We've got peace about this to do something different and to step away. So God used us, I believe, while we were there, and still is, just in a different capacity now. But it's tough sledding when you're a 1099 employee and you're a self-employed individual with a small business like we are. And there's ebbs and flows in the market. Of course, people all understand generally how real estate works. And some days you're as busy as anything, and other days you're looking at your phone to see if you still have service.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, it's something you just continue to have to pray through and pray for, and just continue to create relationships, create trust, and allow the Lord to guide.
You mentioned something, and I really want to go back to it. When you mentioned Rachel, when you're married and you're dating, you share your dreams. What did you tell Rachel when you were dating her and then you got engaged, what you wanted to do with your life?
I think she's probably the one that deserves the standing ovation in all this, because she married an athletic trainer. And that was who I was and what I was when we got married. It's been 22 years now. And the first career change was actually to go into full-time ministry. So I left athletic training to go into full-time ministry as a college pastor, church administrator, and then a senior pastor for a number of years. Then went back to athletic training. And then I was a professor for a little bit at Liberty and at other universities. And so there's been a lot of career changes that she's endured and and not even tolerated, but championed, really. And the real estate one is probably the biggest one because I had, as an Army brat, as you mentioned, Uncle Sam told us where to move. So I never saw my parents buy and sell houses. I didn't have any experience in that. Rachel's family did have experience in that, and she did see that. And as you mentioned, her being a designer and a decorator, she's just got a beautiful eye for things like that. And so when the real estate piece kind of continued to come up with our personal portfolio with rentals and flips and renos and that kind of thing, it was fun. But then when I began to realize, hey, we got a chance to do this full time as a new career path, she was all about it, and it's been great. So, but again, back to your point, we've kind of been out there on our own versus that camaraderie that you have when you're part of a organization, a company, what have you. To go self-employed is a little bit of a different change, but she's been wonderful through the whole thing.
Well, that's neat, and that's the importance of working together, sharing, talking, looking at it. In fact, my closest advisor is my wife. Now, unfortunately, I didn't look at that when we first got married. Oh, well, that's nice, honey. I'm glad you know that. But then all of a sudden, I realized, well, she got the Holy Spirit. She's a believer, and she's got women's intuition a little bit. And one day I just kind of made a joke from the pulpit, and I said, women have it over us on, if you're a believer, have the Holy Spirit, then God's given them a little extra with women's intuition. But my wife actually prevented me from having problems I could have had. And she was very astute and said one day, she goes, you know that lady named so-and-so? I said, yes. You need to be careful around her because she's got that little flirty eye. Now, I don't see it in you, Don, but most men are not aware of those things. And you know what? It really strengthened me when we made decisions about building a house. I can tell you this: never build a house with a woman that's 6 months pregnant. Okay, don't. I remember I laid the foundation for the house, drew up all the specs on it and everything, and she called me one day and she goes, "I can't believe it." I said, "What? What?" The guy you hired is putting the wrong pitch roof on. I wanted a country looking home. This was Dyersburg, Tennessee, and he put a high pitch on it. And it was a little bit too late, and she was disappointed. But when we sold that house 3 years later, I told the realtor, I said, I'm going to resign the church, and you need to have a sign in front of the house at noon. Okay. I said, this is enforcing that, hey, we're making a change. Somebody saw the sign that was in town for one day. And you know what they loved about the house? The pitch of the roof. It just caught their attention. Well, that's like being at home. And that's what sold the house. And we got asking price. But my wife loved a refrigerator, and they said, we want the refrigerator. My wife said, I don't know about that, And I finally talked her out of it. How you probably negotiate things like that. But, it's interesting as we're following God, and it is different going from a paycheck, security in that, in negotiations with that, to a 1099. Whole different world in there. So, how did you go from selling the houses to saying, hey, we could probably get some houses and fix them up and sell them or rent them?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not for the faint of heart, for sure. And sometimes that does tend to be seasonal. And a lot of the current market, here we sit in the end of June of 2025. The current market right now, rates are high. And so it's a little bit more difficult to make some of the margins work with what you can buy versus what you can renovate and then flip. So sometimes you just kind of have to sit on the sidelines and be patient. So we've had to do that a little bit as well as a lot of my clients have right now that are in the investment mode. But at the same time, I think I think you've got to have that a little bit of that spirit in you to be able to do something like that. Because I work with plenty of realtors that would rather just do the buying and selling of other people's properties. They don't want to be involved in it themselves, and so it's definitely an acquired taste, I think, and something that you have to have the stomach for, shall we say?
Yes. Now, let's talk a little bit about the passion you have to help churches find property and buildings. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in that and some examples how you have helped.
Yeah, that's been one of the neatest changes, I think, professionally for me here in the last few years, Don, has been the opportunity to be able to put my former pastoral side to use, and then the commercial real estate side to use as well, and sort of allow these two things to come together. And I guess the first property that sort of got me thinking about church life was our own church in Forest, Virginia. I helped our church buy the land where we're at right now, or the church where we're at right now. And then out of that was networked with a few other pastors and things like that, and it really began to snowball. And so I think the best way to kind of categorize it now is there's churches that I work with in sort of three different categories. The first one would be churches that are looking to lease. They've just outgrown their space and they need a little bit more space because God's providing, God's allowing growth to happen. And so they need to move out of, a smaller facility into something larger. So that combines obviously the church piece along with the real estate piece, which is a lot of fun for me as well. And having been a pastor and been on a church staff, I feel like I know what the pastors are going through. They don't have time to do the real estate piece because it's a very serious consideration. It's a full-time gig for those of us that are in the business. So I work a lot with pastors that are leasing, looking for spaces to lease. And then obviously churches that have existing facilities, that same kind of thing we trust is that the Lord's blessed them and they've outgrown their current church, and had a chance here locally to work most recently with the Hope Company Church that was over on Leesville Road. They outgrew their location and then have relocated over to Waterlick now in a shopping mall strip, actually. And that was a whole nother interesting acquisition over there that we were able to get them into that spot over there, which has been just a huge blessing. But also some real estate nuances there that we can go down that would be maybe interesting to some folks. And then the other one was Crosspoint Church on Timberlake Road next to Kroger. Again, for those of the folks that are familiar with our area, and Crosspoint moved out to an area off of 460. They bought an old skating rink, in fact, and renovated that.
Yeah, that's the only skating ring that I knew about, and I used to skate there a little bit when I first came to Liberty 18 years ago.
Yeah, and Pastor Josh and that staff there at Crosspoint have made that home too. So it's been really rewarding to see God bringing, again, gifts, talents, abilities of being able to be in real estate, but then also understanding and speaking church, for lack of a better term, and being able to bring those two things together to help God's kingdom.
Well, I like what you say about kingdom. I believe with all my heart that it's about the kingdom. It's not about our legacy, who we are. I mean, we're ambassadors. Christ tells us in the scripture we're ambassadors for the King. And we don't serve ourselves. We don't come up with our own ideas. We serve the King in his interest, in his direction. I did notice a new temporary sign come up on the building down the street here that Crosspoint used to be at.
Yeah, they're there's actually been a ministry that bought that and has moved in, and it's Agape is the name of that ministry, and they've got great plans for that particular parcel where the church was, and Crosspoint Church was just so ecstatic to have another ministry go into that building. Numerous churches looked at it. It's on a major commercial strip and corridor here in Lynchburg, and so you never really know who the buyers are going to be. But it was definitely the church's heart to be able to have either another church or a ministry take that, and that's exactly what the Lord had planned.
I think you told me about one situation that you help churches when they have a lot of land or extra land, instead of just letting it sit there, what they can do with it. Have you got an example of that, a church you've helped in that area?
I do. It's a really neat scenario right now for a church, and all this is obviously public record now. But there's a church on Greenview Drive, which is right across from Mellow Mushroom here in Lynchburg, and it's Greenview Church of God, and they had an extra 3 acres in the back of their property that was unused. They didn't have any plans for. And so as we began to talk about that, I told the church, I said, guys, I think this would be a valuable parcel here if you're willing to sell this. And they were. So it took a lot of back and forth with committees and things like that, typical church life. But as I explained the real estate nuances with that and made them feel comfortable with it, We put it on the market, and Don, it went quick, and it's under contract right now. We'll close in a couple of months, but everybody is put a worldly term on this, getting what they want out of it. The buyers are getting a great parcel. The sellers, the church is getting a great price. They're getting market value price for that land, and that's really going to help them in regards to their church budget. So that's a really good option, something that I like to talk through with churches. And I do want to kind of throw a disclaimer on that. Not all municipalities, counties, cities, etc., will allow some things like that. So it's very, very nuanced, very specific to a church property, and something that I'd be glad to brainstorm with a group if they'd like to talk through that.
Okay, so what's the best way let's say one of our listeners go, well, I'm in California and I'm starting a church and I don't know much about how to get property. Do you have any kind of connections or advice that you can give them?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to be much like a personal home search. I think the church has got to be good financial stewards of what they've got. I get a lot of church pastors, a lot of church plants. Of course, we're in Church Plant Central here in here in Lynchburg, and so I really start off with the financial piece, which I know can be a little disappointing to some young pastors or church planners. But really, that's the way the world works. Of course, you've got to have the finances involved. So I think the first place to probably start is to get with your finance committee, finance team, and get a realistic financial picture with where the church is. And then from there, make the relationships with a commercial lender that's local to your market and to your area. And I've got a number of them around here that I work with that are church friendly. And I don't mean they're going to bend the rules. I just mean they understand how churches work, because they look at tithes, they look at offerings, they look at giving, they look at trends, they look at history. So it's very, very different than it is when Mr. and Mrs. go into a personal mortgage and go in to apply. So you've got to have that financial piece looked at. And then obviously when those pieces are in play, then you've got a shopping budget, right? You get a chance then to be able to go out and see, does leasing make the most sense for us right now, or can we buy something, or certainly maybe even build something?
You make a good point there. Being a senior pastor for 23 years and then working with churches, I remember times that, hey, we need to have a gymatorium. We need to have a gymnasium. And so they wanted to go spend, $1.4 million for a gymnasium, but they didn't figure the maintenance part. Okay, you can build this, but guess what? You're going to have to replace those HVAC units in about 15 years. You're going to have to paint walls. And I've been in so many churches that have built gymnasiums that are just in disrepair. They don't figure in maintenance. And guess what else they don't figure in? We need a staff member to do this. A solo pastor can't run the gym program and do this and have all this, so they don't really budget for that. And unfortunately, I've been in a lot of church disputes because the biggest part of a budget in a church is about 60% are salaries and benefits to staff. And so when the growth is not coming and all these people are not coming to the new gym, then all of a sudden you have to have cutbacks. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that in there as well. And it sounds like you kind of help them to have a reality check up front.
Yeah. One of the other things that I'll say is sort of a market trend right now. And again, I think this would go nationally too, Don, that may reach somebody. Unfortunately, we're seeing nationally a lot of big box retailers going out of business. It's been the Dollar Generals and J.C. Penney's and Macy's and some of these other stores. While they may not be completely out of business, they're at least closing a lot of retail areas. That may be an opportunity for some churches to step in. In fact, one of the most recent deals that I co-brokered with another agent in Richmond was Destination Church, and Destination Church moved into and bought Macy's, an empty Macy's building in a mall in Richmond. And so it's been that was a really creative project and a really neat opportunity. But the point on that is, if there's a vacant Big Lots in a strip mall or something like that, and again, your church is looking for space, that may be a good opportunity for a place to lease. Now, a lot of negotiations are going to go into that. You're probably dealing with a pretty high level landlord to some extent, maybe even a national landlord. So there's some nuances there again. But that's sort of a new market now that's starting to appear. Some of these big box retailers and the landlords are having a tough time replacing tenants in spaces that size.
Around Liberty for so many years, I've noticed that they've leveraged buying malls. Uh, they bought a mall here, then a strip mall over there, and then, hey, we have 5,000 acres on the mountain, but all of it's not buildable. So let's move maintenance off and let's buy this building over there and put all our maintenance equipment over there, online uh, facilities and everything. We can move them to another building. They don't have to be on campus to do online. So a lot of that has gone in where then they can rent out the stores that are in the strip mall until they need the space. I remember at one time we were looking for a building, and I think it was a Dollar General went out, and I thought, well, there's a perfect size building. So I found a person to talk with, and they said, well, we're not interested because they're going to be paying us for 10 more years. And I go, what do you mean? They said, well, they were in a contract. They chose to abandon that position, but they have to keep paying. And I said, well, is there a way that we could at least start in there? And since it's just sitting there, and of course, then you have to deal with a lot of lawyers and a lot of things, because obviously Dollar General at that time would have loved to have somebody buy the building so they could get out on that. But I've seen all kind of spaces where we've met, and even offices like church plants. It's very hard. I mean, I did 2 church plants. It's very hard to have it all in your house. Just going and trying to find an office somewhere, trying to find a facility. And I was talking to a church planter the other day. Well, the people just want their own building. And I said, well, that's great. So you got $3 million and then all the maintenance on that. Right now, you're kind of cruising here. You're renting a theater, and guess what? That's pretty comfortable. Okay. Well, it just gives itself to not having stability. And I said, well, we'll get an office and get it big enough where you can have your Bible studies there and show that, hey, you're here to stay, but we're trying to be good stewards until we get to the point where we can buy something.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Don. A lot of times, the internal church discussions that go on are difficult because you wind up in situations where all the people around the table want the same thing within the dynamics of the church, which is great. But sometimes an outside voice can really bring some clarity there, and that's one of the things that I love to do is to sit down with some of the church leadership and just kind of get an overall health of where they're coming from, and provide some of that counsel if I can.
I remember one church I consulted with, and there was a Catholic church in town. Well, they didn't use the building on Sundays. They were Saturday. And so they said, well, we don't know how we feel about, worshiping in a Catholic church. I said, it's a building. We are the church.
That's right.
And yeah, but, Jesus is going to be on the cross, and, it's just putting out things. Well, they had a fellowship hall because I went and talked to the Catholic priests there. So we have a fellowship hall, and we can take that down if it offends them, and we'll be glad to let them use it. And I go, really? He said, yeah. And so I think that's the importance of what you do, because you can do some of those things. And it used to be that churches would never entertain sharing their building with someone else. Oh my goodness, no way, man. They might get our people or whatever.
Well, and Don, you bring up a good point too. If I can just add this as well, if we do have some churches that are listening that have a facility that they've kind of they're not using it to capacity, shall we say? That's one of the most frustrating phone calls that I can get, or responses that I can get sometimes, because the other side of that coin is some of these church plants that are needing space, that would love to rent a space and sublease and work, or even around the existing church's schedule. And sometimes I'm met with, no, we're not going to do that. And it's frustrating because, again, the bride of Christ is the church. And when there's another entity that can use that and even offer to pay for it and rent that space. So if there are some folks out there listening that have that existing church space and that existing church facility that they could potentially sublease to a growing church, I would ask that they would prayerfully consider that as a church, because boy, there are some groups out there that really could use that.
I've noticed with TRBC and Liberty, I don't know how many church starts we have in buildings. I mean, Jonathan's all about starting churches, and he says, "Hey, uh, we want to help you if that's what you want to do," and they have buildings that there's churches meeting in and all kinds of things happening. But how could someone get a hold of you? What now we're going to put on this podcast page, but how could they get in touch with you?
Yeah, the fastest way always is directly through my cell phone. It's 434-258-8827, 434-258-8827. Or they can email me. It's my name, Jason Porter, realestate@gmail.com. And then our brokerage website is legacylynchburg.com. And I'm also on all the social media channels out there too.
Okay, great. Well, listen, Jason, it's been a privilege interviewing you today, and thank you so much. And listeners, I hope as church leaders and pastors and Christians that listen to this podcast, you know, listen to it again when you're not in the car. Make some notes. Give Jason a call and see how he can consult with you and help you locally. And even if you're not right here in Lynchburg or in Virginia, maybe you can do a little consulting and just encourage you with some things. And who knows? Maybe Jason will agree to do a little seminar, and we could live stream it about things to look for in a building that you're looking for on church. Who knows? Well, God bless you and thank you for being on today. And I'd like to just pray for all the church leaders now. Hey, it's a tough job that you have. Sometimes it's thankless. Sometimes you feel isolated. But I want you to know, if you need someone to talk with, God's always there. If you need someone here on earth to talk to, give me a call. My information's right there on the site. Send me an email, and I'm always happy to spend some time with you and encourage you in any way that I can. And pastors, here's some advice to you. If you don't have a regular date night with your wife, you start tomorrow night. Well, I don't have money for a babysitter. Listen, there's people in your church would love to watch your kids, okay? But make sure that you understand God did not ordain the church first. He did the family. You be faithful to your wife and to your children. You spend time with them, and God will take care of the rest. And that will be an example to all that you minister to as well. God bless you. The Church Leadership in Focus podcast is sponsored by Church Health Solutions. You may contact the host, Don Hicks, by email at don@churchhealthsolutions.com. Don welcomes ideas on church leadership topics from you that may be used in the future episodes of Church Leadership in Focus podcast. I invite you to share our link with others you know in church leadership and on your social media. Be sure to tune in for our next weekly episode. May the Lord Jesus give you wisdom and guidance as you lead and equip your church.